My friend Austin relocated with his family to a deeply isolated farming community in rural Ohio. His folks are old-school country people, honest, rugged, and completely unbothered by the total isolation of the sticks. Because his family always treated me like a second son, I jumped at the chance to head up there for a weekend visit now that we're 19. I'm currently grinding through college, while Austin stayed behind to work the timber with his old man on their massive acreage. It was a crisp weekend in mid-October. His mother and younger sister were out of town visiting relatives, leaving just Austin and his dad at the homestead. The drive out there is a grueling 4.5 hours, dominated by nothing but endless wheat fields and empty horizons. To even reach their front porch, you have to navigate a winding 300-foot dirt path off the state route. When I finally pulled in, Austin and his dad gave me a massive welcome, already kicking back with some cold beers on the back deck. After throwing my duffel bag into the guest room, I joined them. Austin was hyping up a network of uncharted logging trails nearby, where we could take my off-road truck to test out its suspension. I'd never actually been off-roading before, but the idea sounded like a blast. His dad fired up the grill and flipped some steaks for us before taking off to catch up with a buddy down the road. Austin and I hopped into my truck, and he navigated me toward a secluded trail entrance that he promised would be perfect for a beginner. It was right around 6 o'clock, meaning we had maybe 2 hours of solid daylight left. We spent about an hour tearing through the muddy backwoods, staying relatively close to his property line. As the canopy started blocking out what little sun was left, we decided to pull back onto the main asphalt loop. The woods get incredibly oppressive the second the sun dips below the tree line. As we cruised down the empty county roads passing endless miles of agriculture, we drove past a decaying, abandoned parish building. Right alongside the crumbling stone structure was an enormous, towering cornfield. Austin mentioned that he drove past the ruins every single day on his way to work, but had never actually stepped foot on the property. Being reckless teenagers, we instantly agreed we had to come back and explore it after dark. Austin suggested we use mountain bikes instead of my loud truck. His garage was packed with high-end trail bikes, fully rigged with powerful LED handlebars and night gear. We rode back to his place, where he packed a canvas bag with a bottle of whiskey, some sodas, and a couple of heavy-duty flashlights. We grabbed their 2 best bikes and set off. He estimated it would be about a 20-minute ride through the dark. Both of us were varsity athletes in high school and still obsessed with fitness, so the midnight cardio didn't bother me at all. By the time the old parish came into view, the night was pitch black. The weeds on the property were chest high and completely overgrown. We paused at the edge of the driveway, waiting for a rare pair of headlights to pass on the main road before slipping onto the grass. To keep the bikes hidden from the road, we pushed them a few feet into the dense rows of the cornfield. There was just enough moonlight filtering down that we didn't need our flashlights yet, and we didn't want a bright beam drawing attention to us. Our plan was to slip inside the ruins and take some eerie, dramatic photos for our social media pages, if we could find an unboarded entry point. The structure was undeniably an old frontier church, evident from the pointed arches of the rotting window frames. We crept up to one of the side windows, but the interior was a black abyss. I asked Austin to pass me one of the heavy flashlights. The moment the beam cut through the grime-covered glass, the interior lit up. Our eyes immediately locked onto something deeply unsettling sitting in the middle pews. It looked exactly like the back of a human head, hunched deeply over a wooden bench, facing completely away from us. Austin tried to laugh it off, claiming it was just an old clothing mannequin left behind as a prank. We ended up making a playful bet. He wagered a 20 that it was a plastic dummy, and I bet it was a drifter catching some sleep. We marched around to the heavy oak front doors, but they were completely reinforced with thick plywood and massive rusted nails. Austin gave the handles a violent shake, just to see if they'd give, but the wood didn't budge an inch. He smirked, claiming he won the bet, because there was absolutely no way a squatter could have breached those doors. I told him to hold his horses and suggested we check the opposite side of the building for a better angle. We crept along the cracked foundation to a different window pane that offered a direct, unobstructed view of the exact pew we had just looked at. But when I pressed the flashlight against the glass this time, the seat was completely empty. I turned to Austin and whispered that he owed me $20, though the sudden realization that we weren't alone made my stomach drop. He whispered back, asking where the person could have gone in total silence. I began sweeping the flashlight beam wildly across the interior darkness until the light caught something that made both of us gasp and jump backward. Standing completely upright, just inches to the left of our window on the inside, was a man. He was staring directly through the glass into our eyes. This wasn't some disoriented drifter. Panic overtook us. We bolted away from the glass and threw ourselves back into the safety of the cornfield. In our frantic state, the uniformity of the crops confused us, and we couldn't locate where we hid the bikes. It was so dark now that we were terrified of using our flashlights, knowing the beam would act like a beacon for whoever was inside. Suddenly, a violent metallic crash echoed from the church building, the sound of a heavy fire door being slammed open. Austin grabbed my shoulder and told me to freeze. Through the dead night air, we heard the distinct, rhythmic rustling of cornstalks being shoved aside as someone moved through the field. Then the noise vanished. The silence was absolute. There wasn't a breath of wind, meaning every single crop was entirely motionless. We crouched there in the dirt, paralyzed with fear, not daring to draw a full breath. We stayed frozen for a solid 60 seconds before Austin leaned in and barely breathed the question of which direction the road was. Right at that exact millisecond, the stalks mere inches from our faces violently whipped open. Someone was sprinting directly at us through the darkness. I let out a terrified shriek and yelled for him to run. We tore through the jagged leaves, the rough corn smacking our faces as we blindly badised our way out of the dense grid. We finally burst out into the open air of the gravel shoulder, leaving the field behind, and sprinted down the asphalt. The pursuit had stopped. Austin immediately dialed his dad, who drove out in his pickup truck to collect us. He wasn't the type of parent to lecture us about trespassing or having a drink. He was mostly annoyed that we had abandoned 2 expensive mountain bikes in a ditch. Still, he admitted we made the right call by running. The following afternoon, he drove us back to the old parish, visibly carrying a holstered sidearm on his hip. We combed through the perimeter of the stalks until we stumbled upon the bikes, quickly tossing them into the flatbed. Just as we were about to climb back into the cab, I glanced back at the rotting church structure. High up in one of the arched windows, a silhouette was standing, watching us. It was the exact same figure. The moment he realized we had spotted him, he took a slow, deliberate step back into the shadows of the ruins and vanished. Austin's dad slammed his door and told us we were leaving immediately. To see a man that hardened get genuinely rattled told me everything I needed to know. We drove into the next town, stopped at a roadside diner to calm our nerves over some heavy food, and his dad placed a call to the county sheriff to report an aggressive squatter occupying the abandoned property. Whether the police ever went out there or found out who that man was is something I still don't know, but the memory of that face behind the glass still keeps me cold. I run a multi-acre homestead alongside my older brother and his wife. During the frantic chaos of the planting and harvesting seasons, we split the grueling daily operations down the middle, but during the dead winter months, they usually take off to travel overseas. Ever since my partner passed away a few years back, I haven't had the heart to put myself back out into the dating scene. As a result, I spend a massive amount of time in total isolation, and the quiet-off seasons tend to weigh heavily on my mind. This specific incident took place in early autumn, just days before our final corn harvest of the year. My brother Marcus and his wife were away in the city for a long weekend, leaving me to manage the entire homestead solo. I suppose it's just my luck that something terrifying would pop off the moment I was completely vulnerable. It started out as a perfectly ordinary evening. I had left the downstairs windows propped open to let the crisp, cool autumn breeze circulate through the old farmhouse. Out of nowhere, a sound tore through the quiet. It was a piercing, agonizing scream. It belonged to a female, though I couldn't tell if it was a terrified teenager or a grown woman. It was just a blood-curdling, high-pitched shriek of pure terror. I instantly bolted out of my armchair, ran down the hallway to the master bedroom, and unlocked my gun safe to retrieve my hunting rifle. I stepped out onto the front deck, greeted by the biting night air. I stood on the porch planks, straining my ears in the dark, when the shriek echoed a second time. It was definitively originating from deep within the dense rows of the cornfield. I raised the rifle and fired a single warning shot straight into the night sky. At that point, I had no clue what I was dealing with. It could have been a legitimate emergency, or it could have been a bunch of local high school punks playing a sick joke on a lonely farmer. The moment the echo of the gunshot died down, a woman's desperate voice wailed the word "help" before the entire property fell into dead silence. I shouted into the dark, demanding to know who was out there and where they were, but nothing answered except the whistling wind. I flipped on every single massive exterior floodlight on the barn and house, grabbed my cell phone, and dialed 911 as I began cautiously stepping into the outer perimeter of the crops. After explaining the situation to the emergency dispatcher, I was told to retreat to the house and wait for the deputies to arrive. A total of 4 county units rolled up the long driveway a short while later. Together, we formed a search line, tracking through the high stalks with powerful flashlights and shouting into the dark to find anyone who might be injured or lost. I assume that whenever someone reports an active cry for help, the local authorities don't take any chances. Ultimately, after an hour of searching, we found absolutely nothing. One of the deputies told me to lock up tight, dial them back immediately. If I heard another peep, and mentioned they would keep a unit patrolling the nearby gravel roads for the rest of the night. After they drove off, I stood on the porch, taking one final uneasy look at the dark wall of corn before heading inside. I shut the heavy oak door and flipped off the lights. Given how little there is for teenagers to do in this isolated county, I tried to convince myself it was just an elaborate prank designed to freak out an isolated homeowner. I headed upstairs to my bedroom, popping a couple of sleep aids to combat my chronic insomnia. Usually, I'd consider my sleeplessness a curse, but tonight it saved my life. Roughly an hour and a half later, the unmistakable sound of shifting floorboards and sharp metallic clunks echoed from the first floor. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had completely forgotten to go back down and lock the open windows. The walls of this old farmhouse are paper thin, and the ancient hardwood floors creak under the slightest bit of weight. I grabbed my phone with a trembling hand and dialed my brother Marcus. He answered with a sleepy mumble, and I whispered as quietly as humanly possible, asking if he had somehow made it back early. He whispered back a firm no. In that exact instant, every single hair on my arms stood on end, and my body went into pure, primal survival mode. I told him someone had broken into the house and begged him to call the local dispatch center for me immediately. Because he was a few counties over, he knew exactly how to patch through to our local rural units. He told me he was on it, no questions asked, and hung up. I tiptoed across the bedroom rug with absolute caution, trying to reach my secondary gun cabinet to grab my 12-gauge shotgun. Despite my best efforts, one of the old floorboards gave a sharp pop beneath my foot. The noise downstairs instantly ceased. Someone was listening. I quietly slipped to the bedroom door, cracked it open, and looked down the pitch-black stairwell. I could hear the cold wind still whistling through the open downstairs windows, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. I began descending the steps, one agonized inch at a time, praying I wouldn't make a sound. I had only cleared about 4 steps when the heavy thud of boots on the hardwood downstairs started moving directly toward the base of the staircase. A tall, painfully thin silhouette stepped into the dim light at the bottom of the stairs. I violently racked the shotgun, aiming it straight down at him, and roared for him not to move. The intruder didn't even flinch. Instead, he calmly spun on his heel, ducked out of the line of fire, and I heard his boots tear into a full sprint across the living room rug and burst out through the back kitchen door. I screamed at him to stop as I flew down the remaining stairs, but the second I confirmed he was out of the structure, I slammed the heavy back door, threw the deadbolt, and called my brother back. He assured me the deputies were already tearing down the highway. I spent the next 10 minutes sprinting around the first floor, slamming and locking every single window before the police cruisers pulled back into the yard. It was the exact same crew of officers. This time, they did a thorough sweep of the property line under the glow of the floodlights, and one of the deputies volunteered to park his cruiser in my barnyard for the remainder of the night. I knew the intruder wouldn't dare return after realizing I was heavily armed, and he never did. However, the true horror of that night didn't unravel until a week later. I was out in the fields operating the massive combine harvester, clearing out the very last section of the corn crop, when my headlights illuminated a strange object tangled in the stalks. I shut down the heavy machinery, climbed down the ladder, and walked over to inspect it. It was a single, high-end women's leather shoe, size 8.5. My mind instantly flashed back to the blood-curdling female screams from a week prior, followed by the silent intruder who had breached my house hours later. I dialed 911 for the 3rd time, leaving the footwear exactly where it lay to preserve any forensic trace evidence. When the investigators arrived, they secured the field as an active crime scene, bringing in K9 tracking dogs to search for a scent trail, treating the shoe as evidence of a potential abduction. The deeply disturbing part is that there were absolutely no missing persons reports filed for any females in our entire region at the time. I pray to God whoever owned that shoe is safe somewhere out there, because the nauseating thought that a violent crime might have taken place on my own land is a shadow that never leaves me. owned a rustic summer getaway cabin down in the low country of Beaufort, South Carolina. By cabin, I mean an old, weathered, 3-bedroom trailer parked on a plot of coastal dirt. It wasn't luxurious by any stretch of the imagination, but it was the backdrop of our entire childhood, and thinking about it still brings back a wave of deep nostalgia. The moment our station wagon would exit the main interstate and the landscape dissolved into endless marshlands and quiet family farms, we knew we were within minutes of the property. I'm the second oldest of 4 boys. At the time of this specific summer memory, I'd estimate our ages were roughly 14, 12, 10, and 8. The trailer was incredibly basic, but it had running water and working electricity. The television set was a massive, heavy tube TV from the 80s, but it was more than enough for us to hook up our original video game console and spend hours playing multiplayer games. We had been vacationing down there for so many seasons that we had mapped out our own collection of favorite local spots, a sprawling timber playground at a nearby country school where we'd spend hours playing intense games of tag while our parents relaxed on a bench reading magazines, an old-school general store where the clerks let us look at comic books, and the vast, dense pine woods that bordered our property line. Our closest neighbors were a considerable walk down the dirt road, but it wasn't far enough that our parents worried about letting us wander. This specific summer marked the very first year they allowed our youngest brother, Leo, to join the older boys on our outdoor expeditions instead of forcing him to stay behind at the trailer. One afternoon, the 4 of us decided to explore a completely different dirt path that branched off from the main dead-end road. It's worth noting that these back roads saw virtually zero vehicular traffic. Our trailer sat on a long forgotten route that terminated at a tidal creek, so the only cars passing through belonged to the 3 or 4 families who lived down there. As we walked, we passed a highly suspicious, decaying plantation house and barns situated at the crest of a small knoll overlooking the dirt path. In all our years visiting the area, we had never once seen a single vehicle parked in the driveway or a single sign of life. A modest, dense patch of corn was growing along the side slope, indicating that someone was technically maintaining the agricultural plot. But it was profoundly eerie how we had never spotted a living soul or a running engine on that land. Given the overgrown woods surrounding the structure, the dilapidated barn, an old rusted tool shed, and the rows of corn, we instantly realized this was the ultimate high-stakes arena for a massive game of hide and seek tag. The sun was blazing in broad daylight. We agreed that our oldest brother, Ethan, would be the first seeker, and we'd rotate down by age. The remaining 3 of us scattered to find cover. I chose to slip directly into the center of the corn crop. I heard Ethan yell his countdown warning from the dirt road, and I dropped down into a tight crouch among the yellowing stalks, completely swallowed by the vegetation. I waited in total stillness for several minutes until the distinct, sharp crackle of dried leaves and footsteps crunching the organic debris on the ground began moving closer to my row. I had no idea which of my brothers had tracked me down, but I wasn't about to let myself get tagged. I violently burst out of the crops, sprinted across the open lawn, and dashed up the incline toward the safety of the rusted tool shed. I fully expected Ethan to burst out of the corn in hot pursuit, but the rows remained entirely still. I figured it must have been one of my younger brothers trying to hide near me instead. Suddenly, I heard a loud commotion on the opposite side of the main house. Ethan was sprinting down the slope after our 10-year-old brother, Owen, both of them howling with laughter and screaming at the top of their lungs. Ethan managed to dive and tag him on the shoulder, meaning Owen was officially caught. I stayed perfectly concealed behind the metal wall of the shed. As I watched the yard, I noticed little Leo leaning against the back siding of the abandoned house, looking straight at me with a massive grin on his face. I pressed a single finger to my lips, gesturing for him to stay quiet, and he mirrored the motion perfectly. Then a cold realization washed over me. If Ethan and Owen were on the other side of the house, and Leo was standing right against the residential wall, who on earth had been walking through the cornfield right next to me? Before I could process the thought, Ethan rounded the corner of the house, easily spotting Leo and tagging him out. Since I was in a direct, exposed line of sight from the shed, Ethan locked eyes with me and charged. I tore down the incline, using the gravity to give myself a massive speed burst. But Ethan had the advantage of size and speed. He chased me down with ease, tackling me into the grass. The four of us congregated at the bottom of the knoll near the dirt road to reset the game. I was supposed to be the next seeker, but I paused and asked the group if anyone else had been hiding inside the corn crop with me. When all three of them shook their heads and explicitly said no, a wave of genuine fear hit me. I told them I had clearly heard someone tracking through the rows right next to my hiding spot, and that it was probably a highly unhinged property owner, so we needed to get out of there immediately. With that, we abandoned the knoll in a massive hurry, walking rapidly back to our trailer where our folks were unwinding in the living room. That evening, our dad took us out to a local wood-fired pizzeria we loved. While we were eating, we brought up the creepy house, and our dad casually mentioned that, according to the town maps, absolutely nobody had legally resided on that specific plantation plot for nearly a decade. Hearing that only made us more reckless. Once the sun went down and the night turned completely black, we knew we wanted to escalate the adrenaline and play an intense game of flashlight tag on the abandoned property. Our mother strictly forbade 8-year-old Leo from leaving the trailer past his bedtime, and I'm certain our parents only allowed the rest of us to go because Ethan was 14 and they trusted his judgment to keep us safe. The three of us ventured back down the dark dirt road toward the hill. Flashlight tag is essentially identical to hide and seek, except the seeker has to physically illuminate a hidden player with a flashlight beam to eliminate them. By the time we crossed onto the unmapped plantation grounds, the darkness was at 90%. The boys insisted I take the first round as seeker since Ethan had done the daytime match. I spun around, closed my eyes, counted to 60, and roared my warning into the void. I strategically kept my own flashlight switched off so the beam wouldn't telegraph my movements across the yard. There was just enough ambient starlight to barely navigate the rough terrain. I climbed the hill toward the main house, which loomed like a black monolith against the sky. I crept around the perimeter of the foundation and checked the perimeter of the old shed, but found no trace of my brothers. I scanned the tree line, briefly flipping my beam on to cut through the heavy pine branches, but came up empty. I clicked the light back off. I knew for a fact that one of them had to be lurking inside the corn crop. It was simply too perfect of a hiding spot to ignore, and the plot was small enough that I could sweep it quickly. I marched down the knoll to the edge of the stalks and quietly parted the leaves to step inside. The moment I entered the dense grid in total darkness, a sudden heavy sense of dread washed over me. The field was infinitely more terrifying at night than it had been during the day. As I cautiously moved through the rows, trying to minimize the noise of the leaves brushing against my jacket, the clear sound of distinct bipedal footsteps echoing nearby caught my attention. I decided to use total stealth to ambush them. I locked onto the exact direction of the rustling, and the moment the noise sounded like it was right on top of my position, I violently clicked my flashlight on and screamed, "Caught you!" But the beam didn't hit Ethan or Owen. The light illuminated the back of a large, broad-shouldered individual, violently twisting away from the glare. "Who is that?" I stammered, my voice cracking with sudden terror. "You're out." A low, rattling, deeply unsettling laugh echoed through the stalks. It wasn't the voice of a teenager, and it certainly wasn't a child. It was the heavy, mocking chuckle of a grown, deranged man. I froze entirely, my hand trembling so violently that the flashlight beam danced wildly across the leaves as I tried to get a clear look at his face. Through the thick stalks separating us, a grown man's voice whispered softly, "Can I play with you guys?" Then, the flashlight beam caught his face. He was peering directly through a gap in the corn. His facial features looked profoundly asymmetrical and deformed, though the shadows were too heavy for me to tell if it was an elaborate, terrifying latex mask or a legitimate physical affliction. I dropped all pretense of the game, spun on my heel, and tore out of the field at a dead sprint, screaming my brothers' names at the top of my lungs, yelling for them to abort the game and run for their lives. I heard both of them shout back in terror from the far side of the yard, where they had apparently been hiding together the entire time. I saw their flashlight beams bouncing down the knoll as they sprinted toward the main road. I illuminated the path ahead of us and told them to just keep running and never look back. We ran blindly down the pitch-black country road until we burst through the front door of our own trailer, completely out of breath and shaking with adrenaline. I frantically explained to my brothers that a grown, deformed stranger had been hiding inside the crops watching us, and that he was undoubtedly the exact same entity I had heard in the corn earlier that afternoon. I will never forget the sheer, pale terror on their faces when they realized how close we had come to danger. When we conveyed the story to our parents, they looked entirely bewildered. My dad didn't know how to process the information, but my mother made it completely non-negotiable that we were never permitted to leave our own immediate boundary line after twilight again. Honestly, I had absolutely no desire to go back out there anyway. I barely slept a wink that night, staring at the window screen, paralyzed by the thought that the deformed man might be standing out in the pitch darkness of our own yard, looking in at us. I knew I had permanently freaked out my entire family with my raw description of the intruder, but they knew I had absolutely no reason to fabricate a horror story like that. It goes without saying that we never stepped foot on that plantation plot up the road again, and luckily it was far enough away that our paths never crossed with that entity a second time. My family ended up selling our coastal trailer just a few seasons after that summer, and I've never gone back to Beaufort since.